Hey everyone, and welcome to How I Ally. This is Lucinda Koza, and I am here with a fellow New Jerseyan, and I would love for her slash you to introduce yourself and give a backstory, if you don't mind.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. My name is Elaine Roth. I'm a New Jersey writer, actually. My first book came out last November. Uh,
Congratulations.
you. And then I'm a mom of two biological kids and then two bonus children.
Oh, oh,
Yeah, so it's a busy household.
yeah.
And I'm excited to be here and talk a little bit about my experience. My oldest is the one who she was born 9 weeks early, and they don't know what happened yet. So that's the story that I'll share today.
Great. So, how old is she now?
She is going to be 15 in March. Yeah, you would never believe this. She was 2.5 pounds at birth, and now she's just about my height. Her feet are bigger than which I can't actually get over. It's amazing. It's an amazing thing.
That is so amazing. To go from, "Is my baby going to get off of oxygen and be able to breathe on their own?" And now she is 15 years old.
Just about, yeah.
That's success.
Yeah.
So she's 15 and she was your oldest. So it was your first pregnancy. Or you
It was my first knee. Yeah.
not the right question to ask unless you want to disclose, but that was your first time. So you probably, I don't, did you know anything? I certainly didn't know anything about what to expect about giving birth. Did you?
Oh, I had no idea. I think I just assumed people do it all the time. This would be fine. And then and the way my pregnancy was going, I was very lucky. I got pregnant very easily. And then my pregnancy was just up until the day that it wasn't actually. My doctor's appointments were a breeze. The scans were all great. My health was all great. I was the kind of patient that I was in and out in 2 seconds. It was like easy check mark until the day that I went to the doctor and I was like, something feels funny. She's not kicking as much. And the doctor said to me, "Oh, you're not a very big person. She just doesn't have that much room in there. It's not a big deal." And they sent me home. A couple days later, I called and I was like, "She's really not kicking." And they said, "Drink some orange juice and lay on your side." I drank so much orange juice. I laid on my side and and I was like, something is still not wrong. So they brought me in for a Friday morning appointment. I remember I called my office and I said, "I'm going to be a little late. The doctor just wants to check me out." They brought me in for the Friday appointment. They put me on a stress test. They took the stress test and they're like, "Oh, you're still," or non-stress. I always forget the name. And they're like, "No, everything is still fine." And I started bawling in the doctor's office. I was like, "Something's not fine. Please check something else." And then that's when they were like, "Fine." And they brought me into the ultrasound. And within about an hour and a half of that moment, she was delivered. That they were like, "Oh my God, she is going into distress. We have minutes here." They pulled me it was connected to the hospital where the doctor's office was, luckily. And she was
Oh,
emergency C-sectioned within 90 minutes of that moment.
that is, that brings up so many things. Like, oh, like when you're pregnant, doctors tend to tell you, "Oh, that's just blah, 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 blah. Oh, that's very normal. Oh, it's normal yeah, some people feel that way in their pregnancy."
It's so dismissive.
It's so dismissive.
Yeah.
And if you hadn't pushed, mm,
That's not my personality to push things either, but I
it's
yeah.
hard. It's hard to advocate for
Yeah.
yourself and your baby, but it's hard, especially I think, to advocate for yourself, especially when you're not used to it. Gosh, wow. And you just knew.
Yeah. No one actually believes me, but I remember, like, there was a moment. we were actually my husband and I were in a birthing class, and I remember a moment where, like, something and I was like, "Oh," and it was within a week of that, the things started to go wrong, and I'm like, "Oh, that was the moment something happened. I don't know what happened." Everyone's okay over there, but
I believe you
yeah.
because it was your body. She was you, basically, at
Mhm.
that time. So I believe that. I believe you feel when something is wrong, obviously.
Yeah, the moment that the shift happened, but
Yeah. Interesting. So how okay. So after the emergency C-section, which what was that like for you?
oh, that was terrifying. I was signing papers as they were giving me that shot for the baby steroid, like, for the
Oh
baby's
yeah.
lungs. They're like, "This isn't gonna do anything because she's coming right out, but at least let's try."
Same thing happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Signing papers, they were putting my husband in a gown, he was signing papers, and it was just like, it all happened so quickly.
So were you able to was there ever like a sense of calm or like relief? Like someone like finally they're listening to me and what needs to be done is being done. But also you were terrified.
I think I was more terrified that I was right. I was hoping that I was just like an overdramatic, nervous pregnant lady. I don't 100% remember what they saw. I know she wasn't moving. There was something,
Oh,
they don't know exactly what happened, but for whatever reason, she was hemorrhaging when she was in the womb. So
okay.
what they could tell in the ultrasound was that all of her, the blood that was left in her body was going to her brain to protect that. And that's why everything else was starting to, all the other organs are starting to shut down.
Wow. So once she was taken out, did she go immediately to the NICU?
Yeah. Yeah. She had to get blood transfusions instantly.
How long did she stay in the NICU?
She was there exactly 8 weeks.
Wow. Wow. How did it feel leaving the hospital without a baby?
I remember it felt terrible. Like, it felt wrong. There was almost a little bit of shame involved in it too. Oh, I don't know. I can't even explain the shame, but I'm like, oh, I'm leaving without her. I messed up. I don't know. It really felt
I'm a
like, oh, I'm leaving
failure.
something. Yeah. I don't know. It was a very strange feeling. This is not correct. That's what I remember that moment of. Oh, everyone knows I'm not taking her home. I don't know who everyone is or
Right.
why I cared, but
Yeah. I know. Yeah. The invisible audience, right?
yeah.
And then the way that you visited her, would you describe how you walked every day to visit her?
At the time she was born, we were living in Manhattan. So we were living on 14th Street and 5th Avenue, and the hospital that she was at was 14th and 2nd or right around there.
Yeah.
So every day I would just walk from our apartment there. And the first few weeks, because the C-section, they had to do the emergency C-section. It wasn't, which I don't fault the surgeons. It wasn't done well because it had to be done so quickly. So my recovery was very difficult. So I remember I was walking hunched over the first few weeks, but I just needed to get outside. And then every day I would walk to see her in the morning, stay there for the day. My husband would come after work. We'd stay until bedtime and then we'd walk back home. And that was a lot of my healing process too, that time walking back and forth.
That's really interesting because it seems like that would be an intolerable task. Like walking, feeling that shame. But through that, it seems like you grew. You had post traumatic growth through doing that. Is that right?
Yeah. I've always been a movement person. So The way that I can process even just my thoughts is when I'm in motion. And in the time when you're right after you've given birth, it's hard to move. You're not yourself. Your body isn't your own, especially after an emergency C-section or a regular C-section or non-emergency. So getting back into your own body, getting into your own breath, that really helped me start to feel like myself, which made it so even when I walked into the hospital, that shame evaporated really quickly.
Mm.
And I remember everyone was like, "Oh, take the time while the baby's in the hospital to heal." And that I couldn't sit home and do nothing, but that walking was that time I took for myself.
And also, you're a writer, so tell us about your book.
My book, it's fiction, women's fiction.
Oh,
Yeah, so it's actually it's I there's some elements of my life because there's the main character lost her husband, but that's where the similarities end there. But it's basically a woman's journey through grief. There's some magical elements to it, which is always the kind something I like to write. Something with the not necessarily magic, but that idea of that the universe is bigger than we really understand, and coincidences. Sometimes there are coincidences, sometimes there are signs, that kind of thing.
yes. Wow. That sounds like it sounds like that was a very cathartic way of dealing with your husband's death. Is that right?
I don't know if cathartic. It's something when I was right after my second, I'd always wanted to be a writer. And after my second was born, and I was home all the time with the kids, and I was like, I need to do something else with my brain. And I said, hey, I think I'm going to write a book. And he was like, oh, yeah, you're going to be great at it. And I remember instantly. So writing it was, even though he'd passed away years before the book actually finally came out. I don't know. It
Mhm.
felt like the culmination of like he knew I could do it and then I did it. It took 10 years, but it got done.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
In a way, you were carrying out your dreams
Yeah.
that you created together, that
Yeah.
you talked about together.
Yeah.
Mm, that's exciting. It took 10 years.
It's not this book particularly. There have been 6 other books before that I wrote that couldn't get an agent, that I queried, that I decided to shelve. And I took a writing class and wrote another book and queried, couldn't get an agent. So it was the learning curve of learning what it takes to write a book versus to write a shorter piece.
So you've been writing for a long time now.
Yeah. Yeah, for a long time.
A lot of work, research, trial and error.
You have to learn to put your ego like over here because writing is it's so subjective, and what one person loves, 3 other people hate. And you have to really just take what everyone says and figure out what works for you and leave the stuff that doesn't without taking it personal.
That's hard.
It's really hard. Or sometimes you throw yourself a pity party for a day and then you move on.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Did you always write fictions?
I always wanted to write fiction, but I started once after my husband passed away. That's when I started getting into the nonfiction writing too. So now I do a little bit of both.
So how do you find that? Do you like it better or worse or the same?
It's interesting. Fiction is just fun. You sit with your coffee and your imagination and you can write. The nonfiction, that I find really rewarding because that I write a lot about grief or relationships or dating as a widow. I write about my birth story. And I really enjoy when that gets out to the right person who needs it. And then I get feedback from them. Thank you for sharing your story. I was thinking this, but I've never been able to put it into words. And I don't know. So I really like that part of it, the way it feels like it's nonfiction feels a little bit more two-way.
Yes. Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah. And helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's doing a
Yeah.
little good. Fiction does amazing things too, but
Right.
I think it feels like I'm
Yeah.
giving a little something to people. So it's nice.
Right. But I feel like writing about it and obviously talking about it, it just helps to get rid of that shame.
Yes, absolutely. When you realize you're not the only one who's had this thought or this feeling, you're like, "Oh, maybe it's not there's actually nothing to be ashamed about. We just need to bring it into the light a little bit more."
And also grief. I believe that when you experience something personally, you become an expert on it.
Mhm.
I feel like grief is possibly the number one thing that someone would need help with.
Yeah, to be seen through.
Yeah, yeah. To understand what's happening and why they feel that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. Because I really think grief, when you don't know it, you're like, "Oh, it's that person is sad, they're grieving," and I think it's the word encompasses so much more than just sad. There's anger, there's guilt, there's, like, relief. I don't know, there's so much that all goes into that one word. So I think when people finally experience it, they just need to be understood. Like, they want someone to say, "Yep, it is all those things. It is that storm, that's what grief is. It's not just you're crying in bed every day."
We need to I'll put your book information in the show notes for sure.
Why, thank you.
Oh, of course. Were you talking about like magical realism?
Yes, but not to the extent of if you've read an Alice Hoffman book, for example. She I would love to be able to write that. I'm not as talented. Like, she has the book is imbued with magical realism, and on every page, I have just little touches of it here and there. And I did pull from my own experience. Like, for example, the way that the character experienced different signs from her late husband. That was something that I found a lot in those first 2 years. I always felt like Matt and I always said our sign was a rainbow. So it would be on, like, the 3-month anniversary, there was a rainbow. On the 1-year anniversary, there were always just these little things of course, they could be coincidences, and you find what you're looking for, but it always felt like there was something a little bit more of him saying, "Oh, I'm here, I'm still with you." And that's what's been pulled into the book, that feeling of, maybe it's all coincidence, and when you really look for something, you're gonna find it, but maybe it's something a little bit more. So that's what's pulled into the book.
That's I've heard that so much. Like I remember my mom telling me that she woke up in the middle of the night and then 5 minutes later got a phone call that her father had died. Things like that. And yeah, knowing, like having that sense of knowing.
In that sense of knowing, right. And
Yeah,
it could just be coincidence, it could just but it almost feels nice to believe that it's not.
absolutely. It's I think in general it's nice to believe that there's more
Right.
to like what is physically in front of me. Yeah. I Another weird coincidence. My husband's name is Matt.
Oh. Mm.
Yeah, so we both full disclosure, we both live in New Jersey. We've never met before face to face, and we had very similar experiences with babies in the NICU. And it's so good to talk to other moms because I never really did that.
Yeah, me either. I did like to always hear, and I couldn't quite believe it when you have a 2.5 pound little thing on a breathing tube, but I always did like to hear the stories of the moms who are now in my position. Like, I have this beautiful, almost 15-year-old who's in honors classes and sports and driving me nuts with boys and whatever she's doing, but just happy, healthy, thriving. And if you had told me that when she was 2.5 pounds in the NICU, I think I would have wanted to believe it, but part of me would have been like, how do I go from this to this? That it feels too hard to do. And it does happen.
That is so good to hear.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah, it seems like it's it seems like it can't happen.
There are like too many steps between that and there. And how do we
Yes.
do that? But You do.
Exactly. Yes. And each step feels I feel like each step feels, like, insurmountable,
Mhm.
but then you do it. And
Right.
then I never thought like, my daughter got discharged before my son did, and because he was having trouble drinking all of his or having all of his milk from a bottle
Mhm.
'cause they were tube fed,
Right.
and I just felt like he's never going to get this.
Oh, I remember that feeling. Staring at the monitor watching, are they still breathing while they're drinking? Are they still breathing while they're drinking?
Staring at the monitor. It's hard to explain. It's just go ahead.
Yeah, and that moment when they take them off the monitor, I remember that, and you're like, "Wait, who's in charge of this? Making sure they're still breathing now." Like, I remember when they let me take her home, and I was like, "I need the monitor. She should be hooked on it for the rest of her life."
Well, you just made me remember that. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Yeah, you're like, "How do I know
How do I know
And
she's
she's like
okay? Yeah.
yeah, and there are, like, those little I remember a d a doula told me was it a doula? The 'Cause those little things that you would, like, clip on to their clothes or something, and
Yeah.
it would go off if they stopped breathing?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, I was like, "Do we need that? Do we need that? Do we have to get those?" And it was like a doula or someone told me that they go off all the time, like, when it's not even real and it's just gonna drive you crazy.
I
The
did get one of
testing.
those, and yes, went off all the time. It drives me crazy. Yes, I can confirm. She gave me accurate information.
Oh my god. That is funny.
Yeah.
So it would go off,
And I
but
thought
did
she
you
had stopped breathing, and she was
Mm.
fine, and I was a lunatic, and it
Wow.
obviously worked out fine.
Yeah. That's oh, ugh. Yeah, you just have to have faith at some point. Man, I think that obviously your story is about your first child and now being on the other side of it physically. I don't know.
Mhm.
That's just it's so important. Just like you said, it's so important, especially for first time moms who are like living in the NICU because you don't know.
No, it's your only experience, so all you know is this NICU baby. You can't picture a different
Yeah.
yeah, you can't picture the other side of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know that we're over time, but I want to ask I know you said it took you 10 years to write your book. What is your writing process like? Do you even have a strict process?
Let's So it's interesting because now I got my agent with the book that I wrote right before this one that got published. So now working with her, she likes an outline first, which I'd never done before. Midnight Garden, which is the book that was published, I had an outline. And now this one that I'm working on, there's an outline. The only process that I really have that has stuck with me throughout is I wake up at 5 before anyone else is awake. I have my coffee, which I have pre-made, so it's brewing as I'm coming down the stairs, and I write in that first hour and a half if I'm lucky. And that's the writing process is like that time is and then hopefully if I have little times during the day when I'm waiting to pick someone up, I'll write in the car. But it's really that hour and a half is like the guaranteed time for hour.
Yeah. I get up before everyone else gets up.
So important.
Oh my God. It's the only time that I am alone.
But yeah. Oh, I get it. When you're it's before like the house gets up and all of a sudden your brain is inundated with the mom things of the house to do when you can just have your
Yeah,
own thoughts that aren't taken over yet.
absolutely. And also the morning can be a very creative time. Maybe it's because the whole day hasn't taken it out of me.
Yes, exactly.
But I always work in the morning.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining me, and I definitely wanna read your book.
Oh, yay, thank you.
Yeah, and I'm gonna put the information in the show notes, and my voice sounds like it's going away. That's lovely.
Oh, you need some tea in this cold.
Yeah, it is cold up here. Good luck with writing.
Thank you. You too.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's so nice to talk to you.
You too.
And maybe in since we live close by, we'll run into each other at some point.
There's very good chance that we would in writer circles or anything. NICU mom
Yeah.
circles.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Oh man. Wow.